Return of the Mount Hua Sect. Chapter 266. Should I show you what real trouble looks like? Hua flinched as he saw the disciples of Mount Hua rushing forward. Are all these bastards stupid? This was the territory of the Shaolin sect. It was a known fact that this was the most sacred place in the world for warriors, and furthermore, the sect itself was publicly acknowledged as the most powerful sect in the current era. They didn't want to lose their momentum, so they held their position. But contrary to how he had thought that Mount Hua would back down, they were instead running towards them. Even they must not want to cause too much trouble, right? But why? Why is no one stopping? He couldn't feel any hesitation from the disciples of Mount Hua. As soon as that Chongmyeong or whatever gave his speech, it was like a command from an army general. No, rather, it was like a bunch of wild boars running toward them. Don't back down! Hua Kwanso, who had already judged that this situation couldn't be controlled, clenched his teeth and shouted loudly. His eyes felt weak, looking at the people rushing at him. Among them, the ones who took the lead were clearly strong. Go! Sasuk! Sago! Sahyang! Baekchun and Yu Yisol could hear the screaming from behind. It was from Yunjong and Jogul, who were both also running at the Hainan disciples like madmen. Of course, there were no swords in their hands, but the momentum they brought forth was no less than if they had. At that moment, Yunjong nudged Baekchun's shoulders as he rushed for Hua Kwanso. What? I will take care of that bastard, Sasuk. Even if Cold Water has this hierarchy, how dare this Saju try to steal what belongs to Sasuk? Since when does Mount Hua have hierarchy? Damn right, you wretched bastard. Baekchun pushed Yunjong aside and rushed for Hua Kwanso. Are these bastards looking down on me? Hua Kwanso's eyes were turning red. He was a proud second-class disciple of the Hainan sect. He couldn't stand that the disciples of Mount Hua were arguing about who would deal with him. I will kill you, you bugs! Hua Kwanso, whose anger was reaching its limit, ran for Baekchun. Swish! There was ki on his fist as it flew at Baekchun. It was the one punch that the Hainan sect was known for. It was a thing of great power. It could deal a very powerful blow that even the most famous disciples of the other sects couldn't face. Unfortunately, Baekchun was someone who had been hit hundreds of times. Seeing Hua Kwanso's fists coming at him, Baekchun was extremely calm. He lightly waved his hand and gently redirected Hua Kwanso's arm and then pushed it to the side. Huh? Hua Kwanso's fist, which had been swiftly flying towards his opponent's face, was deflected with a simple gesture. What is this? And in his eyes, he could see the image of Baekchun rapidly approaching. His body rotated once. Soon, Baekchun's fist cut through the air with a clean sound, aiming at Hua Kwanso's jaw. Dud! And as soon as his fist hit Hua Kwanso's face, a strange sound was heard, almost as if a drum had been hit. Hua Kwanso didn't even get the chance to scream and just bounced back. His body spun like a top through the air and crashed into the wall. Bang! The disciples of the Hainan sect all stopped moving. All their gazes were fixed on their great Sahyang, who had abruptly fallen. What? What just happened? There was shock and disappointment written all over their faces. It was an unbelievable sight for them to see. Sahyang! Oh my! In one hit! The disciples all rubbed their eyes and looked at Hua Kwanso, who was foaming from his mouth. One hit. Just one hit. How could Sahyang lose consciousness in just one hit? If the opponent had been a disciple of the Shaolin sect who had learned hand-to-hand combat, then they would at least understand it. But Mount Hua was a sect that depended on their sword techniques. He lost to a disciple of Mount Hua. Baekchun clicked his tongue as he saw the disciples of Hainan who couldn't accept reality. Who do you think you are, throwing a punch in front of me? Even if not to the face, I've taken at least 1,000 hits in my life. The sad part wasn't that he had hit someone. It was that he had been hit. Yunjong muttered with a bitter, uneasy expression. Sasuk, that isn't something you should be proud of. In particular, being hit by a Saju was even worse. Baekchun coughed at his comment. There is no need to talk anymore. Wipe them out! Yes! The disciples of Mount Hua, having been given great morale, immediately moved to attack the disciples of the Hainan sect. The disciples of the Hainan sect had just seen the great Sayong get taken down with one hit, and now they had to handle all the other disciples of Mount Hua. Ah! The disciples of Mount Hua, armed with their strong muscles, pushed forward. You bastards! Try speaking again, you fucking idiots! The disciples of the Hainan sect were the ones getting hit now, and they were also the ones who had first ignored and abased the disciples of Mount Hua. But for Mount Hua, this was no different from any other day. They had been training for 6 months. They were all prisoners who had been caught by one man. They had come all the way here and were now given a chance to share that pain with others. At this point, they no longer felt angry for being ignored from time to time. But it was two completely different things. Being disregarded by Chongmyung and being disregarded by other people from outside the sect. I didn't like you guys anyway. What? The 9 great sects? Since when did the fucking 9 great sects and the Hainan sect get the right to ignore Mount Hua? The matter of the 9 great sects was like a taboo for the disciples of Mount Hua, and the anger that had been asleep inside them began to surface. Jogul grabbed the face of one of the disciples of the Hainan sect and threw him to the floor. Dud. Dud, dud, dud. Jogul hammered the human head into the ground a few times before he looked for his next prey. You! And as soon as he had discovered his new prey and was about to swing his fists, Yunjong appeared from the side and took down his victim with a neat kick. Pooh! Ah! Seeing his prey close his eyes, Jogul's eyes widened. No, that was my target, Sayong. However, Yunjong pretended not to have hurt Jogul and went for his next target like a starving beast. Ugh. The disciples of the Hainan sect, who saw this whole thing play out, gulped in fear. On the surface, they looked like gentlemanly bandits, but in reality, they were like demons with sunken eyes looking for sacrifices. With restrained movements, the eyes of the Mount Hua disciples searched for their next victims. No, how can this... What? You are a sword sect. Sword sect. It was a term that referred to a sect that taught its disciples the way of the sword. There was a limit to human abilities, and not everyone was capable of doing everything. So there were bound to be those who depended on weapons and others who depended on their bodies in close combat. But no matter how they saw it, the current Mount Hua sect looked like they were used to close combat. Then, did they use their bodies mainly for hand-to-hand combat now? Well, they do have quite broad shoulders, and their forearms are full of muscles. So what? Yunjong smiled and slowly approached the disciple who had just spoken. You expect us to draw our swords? It would be a shame if we couldn't make you roll on the ground with your own fighting style. We have all been living a life of hell because of a certain someone. Have you ever climbed up a cliff with no safety rope? Once that happens, the way you look at the world will change. This is cheating! Then go and complain to the officials, you bastard! Yunjong kicked with his leg, and the person who fell far away finally stopped swinging his fists. Jogul looked at him with delight. You are fighting well, Sayong. That bastard is a Taoist. He glanced around. It wasn't just Yunjong. The disciples of Mount Hua were one-sidedly beating their opponents. First of all, the main factor was Baekchun's first punch that took down the great Sahyung. Although they were all disciples of a famous sect, it looked like it was their first time in a real fight. Experience makes the difference. Experience, you bastards! This meant that everything Chongmyung had made them do all had a use. While everyone was running rampant, there were a few who stood out. The first was, of course, Baekchun. How dare you curse out Mount Hua? Come here while I'm still speaking nicely, you idiot! Baekchun was individually calling out everyone who had made fun of Mount Hua and was hitting them. He was the one who had suffered the most at the hands of Chongmyung back in Mount Hua. That was also probably why he seemed so much like Chongmyung now. He keeps saying he hates him, yet they are so alike. It was almost as if Baekchun was just a taller and more handsome version of Chongmyung. Jogul, unable to unsee it, turned his head. And there he saw another terrifying sight. Clench. Yu Yi-seol was kicking her opponent's crotch mercilessly. And when Jogul saw that, he closed his eyes, feeling bad for her opponents. The disciples of the Hainan sect grabbed his crotch and groaned sadly as he fell. Even Jogul wanted to cry for him. He wanted to run out and pat the man on his back for enduring this. A hidden compassion was emerging for the stranger in Jogul's mind. However, Yu Yi-seol searched for her next victim with cold eyes. Sago, you look angry. Well, in terms of love for Mount Hua, isn't she the one who was known to be the most loyal? And if such a person had to witness others curse Mount Hua, this situation was something those idiots brought upon themselves. How dare this bitch! What? Yu Yi-seol's kick immediately reached the man who had rushed to her after cursing her. She grabbed the head of the guy and began to hit him repeatedly. Jogul turned his head again. I am sorry, kids. Turns out I should have told you in advance just how radical the people in Mount Hua were. Especially her. Bitch. Woman. Well, you see, Mount Hua treats everyone equally. And there was one more person doing unexpected things. You Hainan fucking bastards! Tang Soso got onto the shoulders of a disciple of the Hainan and kept hitting his head with her fists. Puck! Let's pierce that mouth of yours too! Puck! You're going to die for real! Each time she hit her victim, she would give them a piece of her mind before she did it. The 6 months of training she had gone through under Chongmyung had entirely changed her character. She had given up her beautiful sword and was punching her opponent like any other disciple of Mount Hua. Die! Die! Ah, her personality had changed as well. Jogul smiled. I have nothing to do. Not a single disciple of Mount Hua was being cornered. Everyone had straight backs and kept attacking the disciples of the Hainan sect by banging their heads to the ground or kicking them. As a result, the Hainan sect disciples got unconditionally hit. And the person who did this... Good job! Good! Right! Waist! Go for the waist! No! You need to hit there on the head! What did you even learn all this time? He was behind the disciples, stirring up an even bigger mess. Chongmyung was squatting behind the disciples with jerky in his hand, shouting out advice. Ugh! Ugh! Step back! You bastards are crazy! Call someone! Call someone! The disciples of the Hainan sect who were being cornered started reluctantly retreating, but the disciples of Mount Hua pursued them like hungry dogs. Where are you running? Come here, you bastard! You will get hit more if you are caught running! And they began to surround the fleeing disciples. As the siege became narrower, the faces of the victims turned pale blue. Keep trying. You seem to have energy left within you. What? What was it again? The one who got kicked out of the 9 great sects? Say it again. The disciples of the Hainan sect were already exhausted from one round of beating. They couldn't even understand what was happening. No. How? How is this even possible? Regardless of how well they had trained their bodies, these people were the disciples of the Hainan sect. But now, the Mount Hua Sect disciples were smashing them like bugs. This had to be a dream. However, the violently closing in image they saw of the Mount Hua disciples told them that this was no dream. What do we do? Why are you asking me? The disciples of Mount Hua were smiling like bandits. The very moment the disciples of the Hainan sect closed their eyes, not knowing what to do, they heard a voice that they assumed belonged to God himself. What are you all doing here? With a loud shout, a middle-aged man with a yellow robe approached them.